Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 105 of Circle of Fellows. I'm Shel Holtz. I'm an IABC fellow, and I am joined this month by our 2024 class of fellows. Andrea, Juli, and Theomary were inducted officially at the IABC World Conference in Chicago just recently. Gave very inspiring remarks at a general session and enjoyed the company of other fellows at the fellows dinner on the Saturday before the conference began. But this is a tradition on Circle of Fellows that we began last year, I believe, with the new class of fellows. So I'm delighted to have you here. Looking forward to the conversation. And before we get started on that, I'd like to just go around and have you introduce yourselves, who you are, where you are, what you do, and then we'll get started. So we're just going to go clockwise in the order I see you on the screen. So Andrea, you're up first.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Andrea Greenhaus. I'm the founder and owner of a small internal communications agency called Vision to Voice Communications. We're based in Ottawa, Canada, but we do work across North America. I've been in this business for about 35 years. I've had my company for 24, and I have a passion for internal communications that I said in my speech. It's pretty hard to contain. Sometimes I'm at an event or whatever, and people are like, whoa, because I get
Dial it back, right?
pretty excited about internal communications. But I love IABC because, and this group of fellows, because you're my people. So it's always great to talk to people who love communications as much as I do.
And I think we all do. So this ought to be a good conversation. Theomary, you're up next.
Okay, hello, Shel. Thank you for hosting this and hosting the IABC dinner. It was lovely. I had a blast in Chicago. It was really lovely meeting all of you in person. I'm Theomary Kasraanis. I teach full-time for the Cornell S.E. Johnson College of Business. So I'm based in Ithaca, New York, but I also teach at our campus at Roosevelt Island in New York City. I teach exclusively MBA students and executive MBA students, and I'm also very much involved with our external education. So I do a lot of executive seminars with clients across all industries. And of course, I teach anything under the umbrella of business communication and leadership communication. I've been in the field for 25 years. After I did my PhD at Northwestern, I went into corporate. So I did media, PR, a little bit of corporate communication, internal communication. Then I went into consulting, and one of my fields of expertise is crisis communication and crisis preparedness for organizations. And then for the past decade or so, I've been teaching full time. So I'm in the academia. I do a little bit of research, but my focus is more teaching. And as I said, I also work with Cornell with external education programs. I've been with IABC for, I think, 15 years. But for the past decade, I've been a volunteer. I had the opportunity to be in leadership positions. So I was the founding chair of the IABC Academy, then the chair of GCCC, and I just finished my 3-year term as past chair for the IABC Awards Committee. So very glad to be joining you. This is an honor.
It's great to have an academic on the fellows team. We have a few, but not nearly enough. So it's great to have you here. Juli.
Hi, hello. My name is Juli Holloway, and I'm based in Kamloops, BC, here in Canada. I am currently in Victoria, BC, because I do a little bit of teaching myself. I teach in the Royal Roads University's Master of Arts in Professional Communication program, which I'm an alum from. So I'm really enjoying being down here now. But at home in Kamloops, I support a lot of work in Indigenous economic growth. I work for a center called the Tulo Center of Indigenous Economics, and we help First Nations build capacity in supporting economic development and growth under a piece of legislation called the First Nations Fiscal Management Act here in Canada, which gives First Nations a little bit more jurisdiction to be able to develop some laws and collect local revenues. It's work that it really excites me in supporting the growth of First Nations. It's something I'm really passionate about. And along with that, I support the institutions that work with this legislation. So I do a bit of communication strategy and tactical implementation for supporting some of the initiatives that we currently have and the ones that we're working on, hoping to see legislative amendments around. So I definitely didn't think when I got started in my career helping First Nations with like websites and books and brands and community engagement that I would end up where I'm at today. But it's been quite the journey, and I've really enjoyed seeing change and knowing that I'm a small piece of that change. It's been really rewarding, and I'm really happy to be here and have this conversation with all of you today.
Happy you're here too. So let's jump into our conversation. Just before we do, I do want to point out that there are a few people who have joined us live. May have some more pop in over the course of the hour, and I want to invite those of you who are watching to ask questions or share observations or comments. In the YouTube screen, you'll see a place where you can do that. Just click that, type it in, and I'll be able to share it on the screen, and we can tackle your question or discuss your comment. But we'd love to have you be part of the show. So I'm wondering, by way of an opening question, if each of you can share a pivotal moment in your career that led you to where you are today. Just some real turning point that set you on this path. Anybody can go first.
I can tell you one of the pivotal points. You know, when you are as old as I am, you might have a few. But for me, so I was in 2008, I moved to Trinidad and Tobago for personal reasons, and I had to find a job. So I found a job as a corporate communications director at the Ministry of Health, which is a public service. And I knew nothing about the country and the background, so I had to learn a lot. But because we're the Ministry of Health, and this is the national authority on anything health-wise, I had to very quickly respond to a dengue epidemic, a yellow fever epidemic, and then H1N1, which was the first pandemic in 40 years. I know that now H1N1 is nothing because we went through COVID, but at the time it was the first global health crisis. So what happened was, first of all, I didn't sleep for many, many weeks as we were doing the crisis response, but it was a pivotal moment for me because I got training from WHO in crisis communication, and I fell in love with that area. And this is how I started learning more about crisis preparedness and crisis response. And then after many trainings and practice, it became one of my areas of expertise. And actually, when I joined Cornell, the business school, I saw that we had no courses on crisis communication. It was the first course that I suggested, and I created it, and it has been very successful ever since.
It's really
Andrea, Julie?
Yeah, I can go. So like Theomary, there's a lot of different moments in my career, but I think the reason I'm in internal communications, and it started actually with my mom. And she was a nurse. She was a working mom, and she loved her job. And she worked nights in an obstetrics unit in a small community hospital. And I remember at the end of the day, or at the end of the afternoon, waiting to hear my mom wake up, some rustling, and I'd run up to her room and I'd sit on her bed and she would tell me all about her day. And she had a passion for her work that was amazing. And I've always thought, like, I wish everybody loved their work, like the way my mom loves her work. And fast forward, I was early in my career. I guess I was about 30 and working for my first corporate communications job. And I worked for a company that had an amazing culture. And internal communications was a priority. There was a real focus on health and well-being, on prioritizing people. And I've been trying to replicate that in organizations for the last 25 years as leading my agency, because I just think work is such an important part of our lives. And if we don't feel fulfilled and we don't feel like we're growing and learning and supported and respected and trusted at work, then it really detracts from leading a fulfilling life. And that's been sort of my calling and what I've always driven towards in my work.
Yeah, it really resonates with me, Andrea. My first job in the corporate communication world when I left the newspaper business was with a company that was very serious about transparency, culture, open communication. And since it was my first job in the corporate world, I thought they were all like this. So
Yeah.
I've spent my whole career trying to get companies to do what that company did. Julie, how about you? Was there a pivotal moment for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think I always knew that I wanted to, I was really passionate about communications, and I knew I wanted to work with First Nations. From the beginning of my career, I worked for an Indigenous communications agency here in BC, and I really loved that job. We did a lot of work that we were really proud of. We worked with lots of First Nations here in this province. But then I got pregnant with my second child and had my daughter, and just found it really hard to juggle agency life and traveling. And so I didn't know what to do, but I got contacted by an organization called the First Nations Tax Commission and went to work over there, and didn't really know a lot about what they did. But that job was definitely a turning point, because having grown up in Indigenous communities, First Nations, I knew the issues, but I didn't maybe know the way forward, or the identify a good way forward. And that working there in that Fiscal Management Act landscape that I was referencing earlier, it really widened and broadened my view of how to create real sustainable change in communities. And so that's what really oriented my whole career towards this direction. I knew I wanted to take my master's, earn my master's degree and write my thesis on the role of communications in communities. But that job at the Tax Commission changed my point of view to be able to see that we need tangible solutions that are kind of about building up the infrastructure within communities and breaking free of the kind of dependence that from the federal government, to be self-sufficient and self-reliant and move forward like that. So I would say that was the biggest, most significant shift that I took.
Must be nice doing a job that is so rooted in a purpose.
Yeah, it is. It's a definite area of passion for me. And I think that there's lots of Indigenous youth that live in communities that maybe only see the jobs that they're exposed to within communities. And I always encourage youth that have gifts in storytelling and writing to think about a career in communications, because it has been so rewarding and personally meaningful to me. So I am living the dream.
How have your...
May I ask a follow-up question to Andrea?
Sure.
Okay.
I have a question for Julie. Am I allowed to?
We'll take them one at a time.
No, I know that you have your own agency.
Yeah.
And I do work a lot for women's leadership development programs. And we talk a lot about female leadership and entrepreneurship. So I was wondering if you can share with us what drove you towards that direction, and what were some big challenges or like top success factors? How was that experience for you being your own boss?
Well, it's a good question. So what drove me to entrepreneurship was I actually started being an entrepreneur. I grew up on a small farm, and when I was about 12, I had a radish patch, and I grew radishes and sold them. And I think I've always had that entrepreneurial spirit in me, but I had a daughter, and like Julie, that sort of spurred me to think differently about my life. And I thought, oh, well, I'll be a mom and have a business on the side. Well, the business took over, and my children will say, I'll never start a business because it's a lot of work. But it's definitely, when you're running a business and you're not just a communicator, like you said, Theomary, you're a leader, you're a business person. There's so many things that you need to learn. And I think that's what I like about it. It's a challenge, and my business has evolved. So, you always have to stay ahead of the game. You have to understand the trends, the economic picture, what industries are thriving and what what industries are not, where the needs of clients might be potentially. So, and now that I've grown my business, there's only 7 of us, so it's small, but I don't do a lot of the communications anymore. I guide people, I coach them. And that's been part of, I'm 59 now, and I feel that in these last few years of my career, hopefully there's more than 5 or 6 or 7, that I really want to coach people and help them be great communicators, the next generation of fellows, because the reality is vision to voice won't be around forever, but the people that are working for me now, they have long careers ahead of them. And really, I feel it's important to be coaching them and helping them grow. And that's really fulfilling.
I don't know if this is encouraging or not, Andrea, but I'll be 70 next month, and I have no plans to stop anytime soon. I am Senior Director of Communications here at Webcor, and retirement holds no appeal to me. I just love what I do too much.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Don't tell my husband that.
Andrea, you had a question for Julie.
Yes. So there's one of the things that, I took the Indigenous Canada course, and it's been something that I feel is missing for me and maybe my organization, is the contribution towards reconciliation and what we can do in that area. Like, I'd really love to know, because I feel like there's something missing that we should be doing. So what can everyday people or people in the communications community, what can they do to contribute to that?
That's a great question. Thanks, Andrea. And I was actually just in class yesterday talking to my students about Indigenous communications and how communicators can support Indigenous inclusion. So I have a few ideas, but just in terms of like personal journey and supporting reconciliation, we talked a little bit in class, and what I would say here is the land acknowledgements that when they first started getting developed and done, it was really neat to hear them. People acknowledge that the lands were lived on for a long time by other nations. And so now, though, I think we're at a point where I really encourage people to think about the personal and organizational commitment to action and what you can do to support the empowerment and emancipation of Indigenous people. And it could be as simple as your family reading a book a month and kind of talking out, written by an Indigenous author, and kind of talking about what that means. It could be donating some funds to organizations like the Indian Residential School Survivors Society. When I do land acknowledgements, I will say that I'm a grateful uninvited visitor into Kamloops to Secwepemc territory, and I own property in the territory, which isn't a right afforded to members that live on reserve. And none of these actions in isolation will create change, but if everybody was just to do a little bit more education and looking to understand how we arrived at the place that we're at today, I think we would all be in a better place.
You shift the culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's no shortage of really good Indigenous writers here in the U.S. One of my very favorite writers of all time is Louise Erdrich, who's just magnificent Indigenous writer. How have your roles and responsibilities evolved throughout your careers, and what has most surprised you about that journey?
Well, I can tell you, because my progress has not been linear at all. And I jumped from one country to the next. So just a little bit of background. After I did my PhD in Chicago, then I worked in Chicago for a few years. Then I went to Athens, Greece, and I worked there for another 5. And after that, I went to Bulgaria for a year. After that, to Trinidad and Tobago for 3 years. After that, to Chicago, traveling a lot for a year and a half. After that, I went to Dubai. After that, I went to Canada, Toronto, for 3 years. And for the past 9 years, I've been in New York. So as I was traveling, I had many, many different roles, ranging from corporate and having a boss to having my own consulting firm and being my own boss, to being a teacher and not really having any admin responsibilities. And this might sound a little odd to people, but I do think as we progress in our lives, it's important to be agile and flexible, both in terms of cultural understanding and awareness, and understanding more what you would want to do. And I will confess that my dream was to have my consulting firm and work consulting full-time and do teaching part-time, because I've always done teaching like on the side. But I had to change that because of two reasons. One was life circumstances and opportunities in different countries. But the other thing is I found that as a consultant, I would be consulting clients who ended up not taking my advice. So then at the end of it, I was responsible for bad outcome. And they were not happy, but it's because I was telling them things and they didn't want to implement, or they had budget issues or attitude, the wrong attitude towards things. So I had an ethical dilemma. So I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted communications to work the way that I conceptualize the field and what should be done. And when you are just working as a consultant, you need food at the table and you have to make compromises. So I have to say that I don't need to make those same compromises in the academia. And it's a very different type of work, but I feel that I coach the leaders of the future to be better communicators. I'm really happy with what I do right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, based on some of what we've seen in the news, we need better communication among leaders.
Andrea's comment about guiding work more than being kind of in the weeds, I think about that even as early as recently as 5 years ago. I was working, the only job that I've worked where I wasn't working directly for First Nations or Indigenous organizations. I was leading communications at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops through the pandemic. But at that time, I was also pursuing the master's degree, and I was working towards my SCMP certification. And it's astounding to me how much things have changed over the past 5 years, because now, like Theomary, being in class and teaching the next generation of communications professionals. And this year I participated in the BC chapter mentorship program and had a great experience working with my mentee, but it was really eye-opening about how far I've come in such a short time, because I remember being there. I remember struggling with how to move forward and have a career trajectory move up. And now reflecting on that, I do guide work and create strategy and oversee the implementation of that strategy more than actually doing the implementation. And I'm really happy to be able to connect with the students and mentees and provide advice. But I remember it wasn't too long ago that I was there myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, the strategy versus implementation. That's one of the reasons why we're a full service agency, because we don't want to just give advice. We want to help people implement it. I always say the devil's in the details, and implementation is where all the ideas and the strategy come to life. But back to your question, Shell, I think there's two things. The first is I'm going to talk about my parents again. My dad really instilled in me the love of learning. When he was on his 12th birthday, he lost his home and his father to an explosion, and he had to quit. His brothers went into an orphanage, and he had to quit school and start working. And he ended up at McGill University as a medical photographer. And he just thought so much of formal education, but he also realized that education is about more than just school, that you can learn through reading and courses. And he taught himself so many different things, including how to be a farmer at one point in his life. So I sort of let my curiosity drive me. Like, I've taken my Dare to Lead course, which is a Brene Brown certification. I've learned, I've taken a certification in psychological safety to help, understand how to harness the voices of employees. So I think learning is a big thing, and I just always sort of follow my nose, and I probably get distracted way too much by too many books and too many courses. And then the other thing is, and it gets back to being a business person, is understanding where the opportunities are and evolving your business to those opportunities. So the biggest sort of change or progress that I've made is I spent a lot of time as a consultant doing leading change, big change in organizations, culture change, technology change, all that kind of stuff. And what I realized at one point was change is not going to be successful unless we are connected to employees and we have an organization that's fueled by trust and understanding and respect and really listens well. So I changed the direction of my company to really focus more on internal communications, because my idea is if we communicate well and we have those great qualities in our organization, then change will be easier and won't be such a heavy lift. And when you do have a change, you already have the strong foundation. So I guess those are the two sort of comments I want to make on that question.
Yeah, I mentioned that I left the newspaper business for internal communications with an energy company. And when I was starting there, we produced a weekly employee newspaper that went to all of the employees all around the world every week, between 8 and 16 pages. And it was fairly traditional reporting. Most of us came out of the newspaper business, and that's what we did. We reported on things that had happened. And the manager of the department, who is a fellow, by the way, Dave Orman, he brought Roger Dupree in. Roger was working for Xerox at the time, and he brought all of the members of the internal comms department from all over the country, as we had people in various cities where the company had operations, and had Roger talk about this notion of proactive communication. And that was the first big shift that I saw. But at the time I was working there, most companies were still doing house organs, right? Happy talk that some admin did when times were good and they could afford to publish. So I'm wondering, over the course of your career, and maybe even confining that to over the last decade or so, what major shifts have you observed in organizational communication, and how have you adapted to those changes?
Can I just say that I haven't seen enough shifts? Like I said at the beginning, like I worked for this great company, and then I went into consulting and I saw so many companies that weren't doing it right and are still in the news publishing business. So we do audits, and we often find like a lot of gaps, like they're not listening, they're not strategic, they're not intentional, that kind of thing. I would say, I think there's a few things, and this is fairly recent. I'm seeing leaders get it. I had a phone call with somebody a couple of weeks ago who said, Andrea, I think we need your help. It's close to a crisis situation because all my leaders are telling a different story in a different way. And I'm trying to build a brand, and I can't do that if I don't have them all communicating in the same things. I've seen a lot of research around brain science and understanding communication and how it impacts our brain, the role of purpose in organizations. There's incredible research about how purpose, we need purpose-driven organizations, and there's been a lot of evolution around that. Organizations aren't quite getting it. They think that they come up with a bland mission statement and that's their purpose. But I am seeing some science-based changes around communication, how we connect with people, how organization, and my favorite publication is not a communications publication, it's Harvard Business Review. And every You know, every I'm pulling out my latest edition, but you know, like,
which has culture change on the cover.
yes, exactly. And it's over, I think it's dog-eared already, but just really the science behind this is really fascinating and starting to shift people in the right direction. Thank goodness, otherwise I'd be going bankrupt.
Yeah, I was fascinated by the very first article in the current issue, which talks about using the scientific method in
Yes.
business development. So I
Yeah,
thought that was
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Theomary, I'm really interested in your answer to this.
I actually want to build on what Andrea was saying about purpose-driven communications, and we see that as a trend very, very clearly. So we do know that consumers nowadays, they expect core values by organizations. They expect purpose-driven communication and also transparency. And it's not new. So we know that there was this shift first with the millennials expecting corporations to be good corporate citizens, to solve societal problems. That clearly has continued with Gen Z. And I can only expect that the Gen Alphas are going to be even more demanding in that respect. So it's not sufficient anymore for organizations to just have core values on their website or just CSR. They need to walk the talk and really do things that are very tangible. So I do think that Andrea has identified that trend. I fully agree with that.
Yeah, one of the things I love about where I work is that the leadership here, both the board and the executive committee, test every decision they make against the values. So they're not just words on the wall. They get talked about all the time. Julie, how about you? What trends have you seen?
I find so on the what we were just the comments that were just made. I think that just the rate of change today is so fast, and some organizations do get that if you're not keeping up with the rate of change, you're being left behind. And so some organizations are doing a great job at orienting themselves to change and knowing that how much employees are an important part of communications and the communication strategy. When I first worked at TRU, I didn't have experience in internal communications. I didn't think I did. But then when I got there, I realized how much my skills in community engagement in First Nations translated, because you wouldn't necessarily think of that as internal communications, but it is very similar, where people are all joined together, bound by this place, the lands that they live on, and have shared values and shared goals in terms of the direction they want the community to head. So I think that's the biggest learning for me over the past few years, is just how interconnected everything is in today's day and age, but then also how similar some of the various areas of communications actually are, and how much skills can translate into different contexts.
Theomary, I wanted to ask, in terms of your teaching, especially with leaders, are they following these shifts in trends? Are they adapting their leadership styles to accommodate these changes that we've been seeing over the years?
I would say absolutely. I have to recognize that I don't have the average student. I teach for an Ivy League school and like MBA and executive MBA classes. So you're talking about people who have work experience, who are maybe average age of 30 or so, and very smart people. I can tell you that, of course, I cannot generalize, it's not 100%, but I can tell you with confidence that at least they aspire to be ethical leaders that look at profits and efficiency, but also they want to do the right thing. They recognize that they need to be transparent. So another challenge for them, for leaders globally, I think, is that there's this need to be authentic as a leader. And then there's some friction there. So how much authenticity can you show? And how do you balance that with situational awareness and adapting to your environment and conforming in business, because you need to do that. And then another thing that we talk about a lot. So what is your authentic self, and how do you project that at the workplace. So I teach a lot, and especially in my executive education courses, I teach executive presence or leadership presence. And we have seen a great shift. And I don't know if people are familiar with Sylviane Hewlett's work. And she had just published the second edition of her book, Executive Presence, and it's based on research. So the model is 10 years ago when she published the first book, the model was gravitas, communication, and appearance, with gravitas being the most important component of executive presence, communication the second, and appearance the last. And now with the new data, so I'm talking about 2022 data here, there are at least two things that are different in terms of expectations from effective leaders. It's inclusiveness and listening and learning. So it's under communication. We want leaders who can speak well and who can be forceful and impactful, but we also need leaders who can just sit back and listen and try to learn, because you want them to be inclusive. And I know Julie will understand this better than anyone. So as you try to be inclusive as a leader, what are the things that you do? So that these are trends. I don't think that we are where we want to be yet, but I want to feel optimistic because at least there's an effort from us in education and from organizations.
I think humility plays into it too. Like you have to have a lot of courage and humility to understand that you don't know, or say I don't know everything. Help me gain, what's your perspective, or I don't have all the answers. Like as communicators, it's been one of the things that we try to have all the answers, and sometimes we don't. And leaders, they want to have all the answers. They want to, guide the organization in the right direction. But the truth is they don't have, the world is so complex. They don't have all the answers. And that humility, again, it's one of those fine balance kind of things that, again, in our communication, when we're supporting leaders with their internal communications, it's how do they show humility, yet sort of some, but also reinforce purpose and direction. It's not easy.
Now, there's a lot of leaders who have trouble just saying, I don't know. In response to a question. And Theomary, one of these days, I'd love to have a conversation with you about leadership and vulnerability.
Yeah.
Because we've been talking about authenticity for years. Vulnerability seems to be a newer theme that we've been hearing a lot about. Theomary, you mentioned in your introduction that your first job in communications introduced you to crisis communication with some pandemic and health issues. I'm wondering, Andrea and Julie, can you share an example of a challenging communication situation that you faced and how you navigated it and what lessons you learned?
I've got one, and it's a crisis. So I was still in a corporate job, and I worked in a company that made things that were radioactive. Radioisotopes for nuclear medicine, but also radioactive sources that were used in cancer treatment units. And one day I was responsible for looking at the news every morning, and there's one of our units on the front page of the Globe and Mail. And it was linked to, I think, 4 deaths already. And what had happened was a hospital had disposed of this cancer treatment unit. It was, I think it was in South America. People had broken it up and found these shiny things that were actually highly radioactive sources, and we're carrying them home and bringing them to their families because it was valuable metal. And I was in the boardroom, the big boardroom in the sky, the one with all the intimidating older men around me. I was 30 something, maybe 32. And my boss had said, well, we didn't own this company when this unit was made. We have nothing to do with this. And I had to stand up. I stood up in front of him and I said, no, we need to own this and we need to make it right. And I've never shaken so much in my life, but they listened to me. And so sometimes I guess the lesson here is, sometimes you have to do what's right and not what's easy, and you have to have the courage of your convictions. And I don't know, Mary will have some some comments on that, but we own the story. It ended up that I think over 10 people passed away, but we made changes to our supply chain and worked with hospitals to prevent that from ever happening again. But it was pretty sad. But yeah, that's my story.
Actually, Andrea, I'm happy to report that I think that organizations do a better job now with
Good.
crisis communication, understanding ownership. So it used to be like 10 years ago, something would happen. They would be, oh, it's not our fault, it's the supplier's fault or something like that. Now, more and more, they realize that they have to own the issue, regardless of what the cause is. And they need to go out fast and control the narrative and be as honest as possible. Again, we see failures all of the time, but I do see more good examples of leaders and corporations coming out and just owning whatever is wrong, the crisis.
Yeah, Neville Hobson and I just recorded an episode of our podcast yesterday about the post office crisis in the UK. It's just mind-boggling, the lack of ownership that was taken in that. Julie, I want to give you a chance on this question.
Very similar to Theomary. My the experience that I went through was through managing the COVID pandemic. So at TRU, Thompson Rivers University, at the time, there was only 3 people doing communications for a fairly large university in BC. Well, not large, medium size, with a satellite campus in Williams Lake, which is a little bit north of Kamloops. And those early days of the pandemic, our marketing and communications department was going through a restructure, where at that point in time, I was an individual contributor, but we were moving towards me being promoted with a small team working on strategic communications. And then early March 2020, there was only 3 of us working on trying to keep up with the level of communication and monitoring COVID as an issue. We had international students, we had faculty at conferences around the world, we had international recruiters in the field. And so just the anxiety of going through that as the day by day, people were feeling more anxious on campus, and then being kind of my promotion being fast-tracked and then having to quickly onboard 2 new people. So I was juggling being a manager for the first time. I thought I had an idea of the way that rollout would happen, but we were building the plane as we were flying, as we were trying to keep up with the level of communication required and dealing with some communications infrastructure issues. We weren't able to send out emails in a timely manner. They were being batched out 60 at a time. So trying to reach 10,000 students. The art students were getting the emails like a day or 2 days before the trade students, just the way it was going through the alphabet. So I definitely learned a lot in how to manage issues in crisis. And it was it was hard to go through personally, but then also just knowing that there was really nothing that we could say that was going to make anybody feel any less anxious, that we were going through, as we all say, unprecedented times. So that was a steep learning curve. And lots of lessons learned going through that experience, for sure.
Can I just add something? Because we're talking about crisis, I can share with you my motto, and I say this in my classes and to clients. Shell, may I have your permission to use one bad word?
You can use 2 or 3 as far as
it's part of the motto.
The FCC is not involved in this stream.
Okay. All right. So my motto is, if you do shit, I cannot help you. So as much as I believe very strongly in the power of effective communication navigating a crisis, my assumption as a communicator is that operationally, functionally, you're trying to do the right thing. I cannot tell you as a consultant how many times I got calls from clients and they just wanted the spin doctor stuff. Can we just say something and make it go away? No. And if we can, I'm not the professional to do that. So one core principle, I think, for everybody is to understand that they need to do, to the extent possible, the right thing, own it, fix the problem. And then the communicator's job becomes easier. If you keep on doing the wrong thing, no amount of nice words on your website will make that go away or will safeguard your reputation, your brand.
Yeah, I just finished reading a book by Helio Fred Garcia. It's about crisis communication, and he makes the point that managing a crisis is management. Communication's a small part of it, but it really needs to be a managed thing.
Send me the title after the podcast, Shell.
I will.
Thank you.
My
go ahead.
politically correct version of that saying is you can't put lipstick on a pig.
Yeah. That reminds me of Sarah Palin.
Right.
This was a nice segue, Theomary, to my next question, because we are living in an era of disinformation and misinformation and fake news. So how do you ensure ethical communication practices in an organization these days?
I think you can ensure what's outgoing. I think that's the easier part because you have full control of your own narrative and what goes out. And if you are truly a company with ethical core values, that is identified in the communications. I think the more challenging part is to monitor or control fake news or misinformation when it comes from other sources. So one way to do it is to monitor your social media and see the trends and try to bust some myths or correct the misinformation when you see something that's significant and hurts your reputation. And then, I was, when I was helping clients with that, we had a big challenge, and maybe Andrea and Juli can add to that or share some thoughts. So the challenge is you see some misinformation or all kinds of things showing up in your Twitter feed. Of course, you cannot respond to any little thing. It's not efficient, and you don't want to feed something that's silly, stupid into a bigger story. So understanding and monitoring what indeed is worth you coming out as a corporation and correcting it, that's always something that needs a lot of critical thinking and judgment.
Juli, thoughts?
Yes. Some of the topics that we work with in this First Nations context and moving forward with economic development, the legislation that we work under, it's complex and it's nuanced, and there are people within communities that don't agree with the approach. They have a philosophical different point of view, and so we at the Tulo Center and at the other institutions don't generally get into conversations on social media because it's just not a great place to have a nuanced conversation about the different aspects of that support economic development. But we do always be respectful, and we're all trying to solve the problem. And this is one way that you can do it. First Nations can opt into the work that we do. So that's generally just as long as we can be respectful and, as Theomary said, repeat the facts and really show empathy. I think that's the best way that we approach the issues that we deal with in communications.
Mm-hmm. I don't think we've come across anything specifically. We've helped organizations deal with polarizing conversations or topics. I think fundamentally, though, is working on trust in your organization, and the idea, this is stealing from Edelman, is the information hygiene. So being careful where you get your information. But we know that organizations are the most trusted. Like the newsletter from my company is what I trust the most. So I like to focus on building trust by creating, great content, open, authentic storytelling, talking about hard things and failure, not just all the good news. And I think if you can build that connection and that trust in your organization, then there is value in that. But we don't do with external stuff, so I don't have to worry with. And I haven't had a client yet that has had to deal with misinformation. We have had clients where they've kind of gotten a rough go externally, like they're not well thought of, or there's they're criticized extensively. And what we try and do is sort of build the brand from the inside, so that the focus becomes a better understanding of the organization and the value and and its place in the world through its employees.
So
Shel, since I know you're the tech guy here and you know a lot about AI, so I was wondering, when we think about disinformation and fake news coming through AI tools, and we know that that's what's happening, if you're not experienced enough to identify the false statements or the inaccuracies, like what's your take on all that?
Well, I think communicators need to get up to speed in a hurry on how to identify this. It was a problem before we saw the generative AI really infiltrate this space. This is just a tool that people can use to scale up those efforts. So we have to get adept at identifying misinformation. We have to do it fast because the rapid response is critical. As you know, Theomary, in a crisis, people tend to pay attention to the first authority to come out with a statement.
Absolutely.
And everybody else is now battling the perception that was created by that initial statement. So we got to be out there first. And that means knowing when the disinformation or the misinformation has been released. So yeah, that listening and that monitoring has become really critical. I think they would probably revoke our fellows designations if we didn't talk about measurement. So let's talk about measurement for a few minutes. Before I ask my question, though, with only about 8.5 minutes left in the stream, I did want to invite those who are with us live. If you have a question or a comment or an observation, please share it. We'd love to get it into the mix. But in terms of measurement, how do you approach measuring the impact and the ROI of communication initiatives? And have you seen that change over time?
I'll go first. It has changed. I mean, obviously we get more metrics. I think the real trick to good measurement and metrics and evaluation is setting the right goals. If you don't have the right, so when we do strategies, we have the goals and the measures at the front. When I learned how to do a communication strategy, the goals were at the end, or how you were going to measure success was at the end of your strategy. We put it up front with the goals. So this is our goal, and this is how these are the KPIs that we're gonna use. And I think there's not enough focus on making sure the goals are correct and that they're measurable and achievable. And so I think that's the biggest hurdle we have to do, is that upfront work of what are we trying to achieve. So
measuring outcomes rather than outputs.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not about the clicks or whatever. The clicks tell a story. The other thing I think that we forget about when we're talking about measurement is the power of our own stories. So, we set goals, we want to measure them, but what's the story? How have we can tell our own stories about the difference that we've made in organizations. One of my favorite stories about a story is I was working with an organization to change their perception or their attitude towards corporate social responsibility. And I found a powerful story to do that. And it was difficult initially because you can't have culture change in 6 months. It was difficult initially to kind of measure the difference that some of the storytelling we were doing and some of the other activities that we were doing were making. But when I realized, like 5 years after I left that project, the same story was written in our national newspaper. And I realized the power of that story. And they were telling it again about how this was a story of a company that this organization had helped. And to me, that's like, there was the difference that I made right there, is finding that story and making that story into more than just a one story in the newsletter. That story has had legs. It's sustained itself for 5 years, and it showed up in the Globe and Mail.
Julie, I imagine that measurement presents some unique challenges in your situation.
Yes, I think about a couple of things when we think about measurement. I think about sometimes we just want to, like as Andrea said, we want to make sure that we're developing strategies that are aligned with the overall goals and objectives. We want to know what success looks like and how communications can help get us there. But just broadly thinking about how we can make sure that we're making good decisions. I like to take anecdotal comments and turn that into something that we can use. So when I went to TRU, I heard things about the intranet's not working, the newsletters has issues, but if it's all anecdotal, you can't really do anything with that. You can't report on that and recommend changes. So it's easy to develop a quick communications audit. What do people want? What's not working? What is working? And just start to use those insights to make better decisions. Surveys or audits don't have to be statistically valid. You're not doing anything other than making better decisions with them. So in that context, I saw lots of ways to measure. And in the work that I do now, we do try to build in simple measurements where we can. If we're doing an ad in an Indigenous education journal, we use a vanity URL, of course, to be able to track how many people got to us through either a QR code or the URL, and just little ways that we're able to track just to know, are we making the best decision, or is there room for improvement in the future? And I think when you have that mindset, you can find lots of ways to measure and just track the success of the work that you do.
Mm-hmm.
Theomary, what are you teaching about measurement?
Well, that is part of my eCornell course, because I have some online courses where I do teach measurement and evaluation very explicitly. And I can tell you it's not difficult to do. As Julie said, there are some easy ways to do it, but you have to be in that mindset. It has to be part of your strategy. It needs to be aligned with your goals and objectives, and you need to have a budget for it. Not a huge budget, but just a little bit of budget. And I will speak to you as a blue ribbon evaluator, and I know, Shell, you will sympathize with me. Every year, in IABC, we have been talking about measurement and evaluation for what, 10, 20 years? It's not a new concept. We have been talking about it, I think, ad nauseum. And sometimes I think that we live in a bubble where we all agree that, yes, of course, you should measure your results. And consistently in the entries that we get for the gold quill, I think one of the weakest areas is that, the measurement and evaluation. Regardless of how much I think IABC has tried to spread the word, still as an industry, we are not where we're supposed to be. And I don't know why. I think that we do teach it. I mean, whenever I taught, it was part of the course, but I think that communicators just don't have enough time, or they're not experienced enough to truly understand the value of it.
Even with our clients, it's us that are driving the measurements. So we produce a report and we'll say, this is, these are the goals, these are the results. And we always say, and, we can improve next month or this next year or whatever. These are the areas for improvement. Like Julie said, better decision-making, but we're the ones driving it. And it's in like an afterthought. And, again, resources, time, it's always on to the next.
Mm-hmm.
I swear I'm not making this up. I once had a gold quill entry that listed 5 or 6 really good, well thought out objectives at the beginning. And under measurement, it said, we got a really nice letter from the CEO's wife.
Good. Okay.
That was it. That was the measurement. So I have 9 questions left, and we have about a minute left. So we're
Okay.
not going to get to those. We should do this again and get to the rest of these questions. This has been great, though. And again, I'm thrilled to welcome you all to the Fellows of IABC. I want to let everyone know that the next Circle of Fellows is also in July. That's because this one was postponed until today. Thursday, July 18th at noon, episode 106 will focus on communication structures, teams, leadership, and process, and related topics. So that's going to cover a lot of ground tied to a common theme. The panel here will be truly international. Diane Gajewski, who is there in New York with you, Theomary, and an academic. Russell Grossman in the UK, Rajiv Kumar in India, and Letitia Narvaez in Mexico City. So that should be a great conversation. I'm looking forward to that. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, those of you who were watching in real time. And thank you, 3, for joining me today. It was great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.